Hey everyone, welcome back to Nurse Crit. My name is Chasen. I'm an acute care nurse practitioner. Does your patient have heart failure, edema, or bum kidneys? Then you probably are going to need some diuretics to fix them. If you work in a cardiac specialty, you likely will be giving these meds every day. Let's have a quick review so you can master these amazing pharmacologic tools. The objectives for this video are to understand what diuretics are and why they are used. Then we will review the 5 diuretic classes, including their mechanism, their indications, their adverse effects, and finally, I will discuss my own diuretic strategy. Even if you're not a prescriber, it can be useful to know these tips in case you want to recommend it to a provider. Since this is a video involving pharmacology, this would be a good time to mention that I have a nursing pharmacology book available on Amazon. It's great for nursing students and new grads who need to form a strong foundational base in pharmacology. Sure, you can look up meds on the internet, but who's got the time? You have a million other things to do, and having to look up medications all throughout your shift would drastically decrease your productivity. My pharmacology book will teach you the essential information in an easy-to-memorize format that will turn you into a pharm whiz where you will rarely need to reference drugs on the spot anymore. The link is in the description below. So, what are diuretics? Diuretics are a broad class of medications that affect the normal reabsorption and excretion of water and electrolytes in the kidney. Normally, the kidneys are extremely intelligent organs that very tightly regulate fluid and solute balance in the blood. But in pathologic states, whether it be from heart problems, endocrine disorders, or failure of the kidneys themselves, the body will lose the ability to effectively maintain a proper balance. And this is where diuretics come in to save the day. If a patient loses the ability to pee and clear out fluid and metabolic waste, they will die within just a few days. Traditionally, diuretics are broken down into 5 classes. They are loop diuretics, thiazide diuretics, potassium-sparing diuretics, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and osmotic diuretics. There are a few other drug classes that work in the kidneys to affect water and solute excretion, which kind of technically makes them a form of diuretics, but they aren't classified as a diuretic in the traditional sense. These other classes include the SGLT2 inhibitors and V2 receptor antagonists, or VAPTANs. Maybe one day they will make it onto the list of diuretics, but since they currently are not, I will not review these 2 classes. I don't want to bore you with a review of the physiology of the nephron. I mean, it's interesting and useful to know, but honestly, it's not something I ever think about or can remember in clinical practice. Since I know that life goes on without really knowing this, I won't go into any detail about it either. All I will mention is the site in which each diuretic class works. Progressing sequentially through the nephron, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors and osmotic diuretics exert their effects in the proximal convoluted tubule. Loop diuretics act on the loop of Henle. Thiazide diuretics affect the distal convoluted tubule, and potassium-sparing diuretics function in the collecting duct. Now onto the specific diuretic classes. The first class to review are the loop diuretics. These are not the most prescribed class, but they are the most potent class and are used the most in the hospital setting. Drugs in this class include bumetanide, furosemide, torsemide, and ethacrynic acid. Loop diuretics work in the loop of Henle to inhibit the sodium-potassium chloride cotransporter, which results in an increased excretion of these ions along with water, calcium, and magnesium. These drugs are used when intensive diuresis is required. They assist with eliminating peripheral and pulmonary edema from heart failure, cirrhosis, or other disorders. Knowing it increases the excretion of electrolytes, you can surmise that the adverse effects include hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypocalcemia, and hypomagnesemia. Excessive fluid loss can lead to dehydration, hypotension, and metabolic alkalosis, also known as a contraction alkalosis. Loop diuretics can also lead to elevated glucose and uric acid levels. The other main adverse effect to watch for is ototoxicity. Loop diuretics, except for ethacrynic acid, do contain a sulfonamide derivative and may cause allergic reactions in those with severe sulfa allergy, although in practice this is rarely a problem. Many patients with a known sulfa allergy do tolerate loop diuretics just fine. The next class to review are the thiazide diuretics. Although less potent than the loop diuretics, these are the most commonly prescribed diuretics as they are used much more on an outpatient basis. Technically, there are thiazide and thiazide-like diuretics, but at the nursing level, there is no need for this distinction other than for test taking. The drugs that comprise this class are chlorothiazide, hydrochlorothiazide, chlorthalidone, indapamide, and metolazone. Similar to loop diuretics, the thiazides block reabsorption of sodium and chloride in the distal convoluted tubule, leading to increased sodium chloride-enriched urine excretion. Thiazides are primarily used as first-line agents in the treatment of hypertension. With long-term use, these drugs have a vasodilatory effect. Although its diuretic effect is less pronounced, it also is used to treat edema associated with heart failure, cirrhosis, hormone therapy, and renal disorders. Also, like loop diuretics, there is a lot of electrolyte wasting leading to hyponatremia, hypokalemia, and hypomagnesemia. The one opposite electrolyte derangement is calcium. Thiazides can actually increase serum calcium levels. And the remaining adverse effects include dehydration, hypotension, hyperglycemia, hyperuricemia, meaning it can lead to gout, and dyslipidemia. The third most used class of diuretics are the potassium-sparing diuretics. Here we also have two subclasses, which are the aldosterone antagonists and the epithelial sodium channel or ENaC inhibitors. Eplerenone and spironolactone are the aldosterone antagonists, while amiloride and triamterene are the two ENaC blockers. Both of these subclasses work in the collecting duct of the nephron. While they work along different stages of the same pathway, the net result is essentially the same. I think the pharmacodynamics are somewhat analogous to the relationship between ACE inhibitors and ARBs, if you understand how those work. The potassium-sparing diuretics all increase sodium excretion while increasing potassium reabsorption. Their fluid excretion properties are quite weak, and these drugs are not used in isolation for fluid removal. They are combined with loop or thiazides to reduce their caldiuretic or potassium wasting effects. The aldosterone antagonists are also used for hyperaldosteronism, heart failure, and resistant hypertension. As you can imagine, the main adverse effect of these drugs is hyperkalemia. Caution should be used when co-administering other drugs that can raise potassium like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, NSAIDs, and others. I have an older video on hyperkalemia that goes over this if you're interested. Other notable side effects are renal dysfunction, GI symptoms as well as GI bleeding, blood dyscrasias, gout, and the aldosterone antagonists specifically can cause gynecomastia, erectile dysfunction, and menstrual disorders. The fourth class of diuretics to discuss are the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. The one drug in this class is acetazolamide. There are a few others, but they are either rare or topical eye drops. Acetazolamide is the only one worth learning at this point. This class increases bicarbonate excretion in the proximal convoluted tubule, leading to an alkaline diuresis. It is also a very weak diuretic in terms of fluid removal and is primarily used for glaucoma, altitude sickness, and metabolic alkalosis. It is occasionally used for epilepsy as well, as it can elevate the seizure threshold. The adverse effects of acetazolamide are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, confusion, paresthesias, electrolyte imbalances, and metabolic acidosis. Like the loop diuretics, it can be contraindicated in those with a severe sulfa allergy. The final class to discuss are the osmotic diuretics. This specifically is mannitol. Mannitol is a sugar alcohol that raises the serum osmolality. This has the effect of drawing fluids from the tissues into the blood, expanding the plasma volume. As mannitol passes through the kidneys, it is not able to be reabsorbed, and it drags fluids out with it as it's excreted into the urine. It is primarily used to treat cerebral edema and reduce intracranial pressure. It can also be used in the treatment of acute glaucoma. It is sometimes used to reduce the toxicity of certain chemotherapy agents and promote the renal excretion of other toxic substances. In terms of adverse effects, mannitol can cause acute kidney injury, CNS toxicity, electrolyte imbalances, phlebitis, hypersensitivity reactions, and volume derangements depending on the stage of administration. It initially causes a temporary increase in blood volume or hypervolemia, followed by significant fluid losses through urination, which can eventually result in hypovolemia. The last objective to talk about is my approach to diuretic use. This is not an evidence-based algorithm. This is just how I would likely go about choosing diuretics based on experience and observations of nephrologists. In cardiac surgery, we use diuretics a lot. We order it on almost every patient almost every day. We give them for any number of reasons, but simply put, when a patient is fluid overloaded anywhere in the body, we want to dry them out. Since we are trying to aggressively dry out a patient, we must start with a loop diuretic. Lasix is almost always going to be my first choice. It's reliable and it's cheap. We typically start with 40 milligrams IV as a standard dose. If we don't want too aggressive of a diuresis, we might choose to only give 20 milligrams. If the patient responds well and we are hitting our fluid balance goals, then we can just continue using that. But sometimes patients don't respond as well as we would like, or they are already in a state of acute kidney injury. In that case, we can repeat doses and or increase the doses. Unlike most of the drugs that require a dose reduction in the face of AKI, diuretics will require an increased dose. It's not unheard of to give 80 or even over 100 milligrams per dose in those with poor kidneys. If the kidneys do not respond to a second dose of Lasix, my next step would be to try Bumex. Yes, I know they are both loop diuretics that work the same way, but from experience, I have seen that sometimes patients just respond better to Bumex. If that fails, then my next step will likely be to add a dose of a thiazide diuretic. Because we usually need faster response times, I will often reach for Diuril, which is the only IV thiazide available. If you have time, you can add one of the other oral thiazides. Combining loop diuretics with thiazide diuretics produces a synergistic effect known as sequential nephron blockade, and I have witnessed this work beautifully. At this point, if there is still inadequate urine production, it's time to start a Bumex drip, typically at 1 milligram per hour. Although a Lasix drip would be cheaper, a Bumex drip is associated with less ototoxicity and often the preferred drip. A Bumex drip with a thiazide diuretic rarely fails. If that does not start making urine, something else is wrong. I recently had a patient who was not making urine, creatinine was climbing, and the Bumex drip was not working. This patient was post-cardiac surgery, so we had hemodynamic monitoring. His non-invasive BP cuff was reading a systolic pressure in the 120s, while his A-line was only in the 70s. It's not uncommon for an A-line to not correlate with an NIBP, so the nurses were going by the cuff since it was a very reasonable pressure. Of note, the patient was also in a junctional rhythm at the time. I talked with the nurse and said, hey, what if the A-line is working properly? What if that really is his peripheral pressure? Since the patient was in a junctional rhythm, I elected to start atrial pacing the patient through his epicardial wires to see if a little atrial kick would improve his hemodynamics. Damn! Within a few minutes of pacing, the A-line pressure started to rise nearly identical to the NIBP without any vasopressors. The cardiac index went from a little less than 2 liters to almost 3 liters, and within an hour, urine started filling up the Foley bag. The moral of my story is that if a buttload of diuretics aren't working, make sure they are even getting into the kidneys. If perfusion is inadequate, then all the diuretics in the world can't enter into the kidneys to do its job. After a prolonged diuresis, you may start to run into electrolyte problems, the most common being hypokalemia. One of the insane strategies that you will see every day is giving IV potassium in conjunction with diuresis. You end up in this never-ending cycle because you give a ton of fluid with the IV potassium, then you have to diurese it off, which depletes the K, necessitating more potassium, and then more diuresis, etc. Once you start to have hypokalemia from prolonged diuresis, you should consider adding a potassium-sparing diuretic as early as possible. It probably won't offset all of the kaliuresis, but it will lessen the amount of supplemental potassium you have to give. Another common occurrence from excessive diuresis is hypernatremia. Oftentimes, loop diuretics produce a water loss in excess of sodium loss, which hemoconcentrates the serum sodium. If by chance you didn't need a thiazide diuretic earlier, this would be another good indication for it. Thiazides often will create a greater sodium than fluid loss and do a pretty good job at bringing down that serum sodium. The last problem you might encounter is a metabolic or contraction alkalosis. When the serum bicarb starts to get too high, you can consider giving some Diamox IV to try and pee off more bicarb. So to review, add a potassium-sparing diuretic for hypokalemia, a thiazide for hypernatremia, and Diamox for a metabolic alkalosis. And that is my personal approach to diuretics. I admit I am not likely doing all these things independently since nephrology is probably already involved and I wouldn't want to step on their toes, but I think this is a reasonable approach to diuretic selection and use. Don't be afraid to combine diuretics to achieve the best balanced diuresis for the patient in front of you. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned a lot. If this video brought any value to you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on future nursing videos. It's my goal to elevate the practice of nurses so we can provide the best quality care that our patients deserve. Don't forget to check out my book, and I will talk to you again in the next video. See ya!